The story opens on a rainy evening inside a rundown Berlin bar owned by an old man named Owen. The place hides an odd secret, a mysterious hole in one wall. A man called Neil steps inside, determined to reach a woman supposedly kept in the building's basement. Owen blocks him, warning that nothing but pain lies beyond that door, and refuses Neil's offer of $2,000. Neil pleads, explaining he just wants a final moment with his departed wife, but Owen stands his ground, telling Neil never to return. Once Neil has left, Owen records a message for whoever will own the bar next. He confesses that the property comes with a dangerous inhabitant, Baghead, who dwells in the cellar. Owen explains the terrible responsibility. Once someone becomes the official owner, they're forced to act as Baghead's warden. If Baghead escapes, disaster will follow, and the guardian must never abandon the place or risk a fate of illness and death. Owen says he plans to try and rid the world of Baghead's evil tonight, though he doubts he'll live to see another day. Owen heads into the basement, where we catch a glimpse of a horrific, twisted woman bound to a chair, Baghead. He sets out to destroy the building and end the curse, but the fire he starts only claims his own life, leaving Baghead unscathed. The narrative shifts to London, where a young woman named Iris and her friend Katie are introduced. Iris is broke, having just been kicked out of her home for missing rent payments, and now has nowhere to stay. At that moment, she receives a call from a lawyer who breaks the news of her estranged father's death and requests her presence in Berlin. The following day, Iris arrives in Berlin and is shocked to see her father's charred corpse. It's revealed that Owen, who died in the fire, was her father, though the two hadn't spoken for many years. The lawyer informs her that Owen has left her the bar as inheritance, a complete surprise to Iris, since she never even knew her father owned such a place. As the lawyer walks her through the deteriorated property, he mentions it needs substantial repair and offers to find a buyer. Iris, overwhelmed and unsure, says she isn't ready to sell yet and wants some time to think. She chooses to stay overnight at the pub, as she currently has nowhere else to go. The lawyer reluctantly allows it. Later, Iris calls Katie, revealing that she never had a good relationship with her dad and doesn't feel much grief. Katie urges Iris not to isolate herself and says she'll come to Berlin soon to keep her company. That night, as Iris sleeps, strange sounds from the basement rouse her. She leaves her bed to investigate, but finds nothing amiss. She approaches the locked basement door, noticing odd symbols inscribed on it, but realizes she doesn't have the keys yet and can't open it. Suddenly, she senses someone else is in the building. Alarmed, she discovers Neil, who has returned. He assures her he means no harm. He's simply desperate to meet the woman in the cellar. Iris is baffled, insisting nobody's down there, but Neil's conviction doesn't waver. He offers her $4,000 and promises even more if she'll let him in. Tempted by the money, Iris tells Neil she currently doesn't have access to the basement, but asks him to come back the next day. In the morning, Iris meets the lawyer to announce her decision. She wants to live in her father's old pub instead of selling it. This isn't what the lawyer was hoping to hear, but he respects her choice and doesn't protest. The lawyer hands Iris an old deed for the property, and after she signs her name, she officially becomes the owner. Along with the paperwork, she receives a set of keys and a cassette tape filled with guidance from Owen, meant for whoever took over the bar. That night, Katie arrives to support her friend. Iris brings up Neil, mentioning the $4,000 he gave her and his bizarre claim that someone is living in her basement. Katie is alarmed, warning that if Neil is right, staying there could be dangerous. But Iris shrugs it off, suggesting that her father might have made money by letting people have frightening experiences, almost like a haunted house attraction. Not long after, Neil returns, and, together, the three make their way to the cellar. The space is shrouded in darkness, with two chairs waiting in the center. Neil is quickly drawn to a wide crack in the wall, calling out for someone to emerge. The girls tease him, thinking it's a joke, but suddenly a grotesque figure, Baghead, appears, a deranged woman with a sack over her head. Ignoring Neil's pleas, Baghead moves toward Iris. But to everyone's shock, the creature follows Iris's instructions, when told to stop and sit. Neil then takes his seat in front of her, offering a ring that once belonged to his late wife, Sarah. Baghead places the ring in her mouth. As Neil starts to tie her to the chair, Baghead lets out a chilling scream. Her hands shifting. Neil lifts the sack from her face, only to see his long-dead mother looking back at him. He's stunned, expecting Sarah, not his mother, who passed away 20 years earlier. He asks why she ended her own life, but her replies are vague and unsettling. After a couple of minutes, her eyes turn completely black, and she claims she never wanted children and despised him, before suddenly wanting to kiss him. In a flash, she vanishes from the chair, only to materialize again, pinning Neil to the ground and spewing water onto his face. Iris steps in, commanding the creature to stop and covering her head with the sack once more. Baghead listens, returns the ring, and disappears into the crack in the wall. Once they leave the cellar, Neil realizes his mother's appearance was triggered because the ring originally belonged to her before he gave it to Sarah. He confesses that he forgot to mention a critical rule. Speaking with the dead through Baghead should never last more than 2 minutes, or the entity will take control and become violent. Despite the unsettling experience, Neil still longs to reconnect with Sarah and urges Iris for another chance. Iris, disturbed, refuses. Neil insists he just wanted a proper farewell, handing her the cash and leaving his contact information, asking her to reach out if she ever changes her mind. With Neil gone, Iris and Katie watch Owen's recorded tape. Owen explains that Baghead responds only to the current owner, the person whose name is on the deed and has the power to summon the dead. He warns that if anyone speaks to their deceased loved ones for more than 2 minutes, Baghead can begin to manipulate and even harm them. The more often she is used, the stronger and more dangerous she becomes, and ultimately she will try to force her way into the minds of those who summon her, keeping them tied to the house. That, Owen says, is why he abandoned his family. He wanted to protect them from the curse. But after Owen's death, the lawyer unknowingly drew Iris back into the dangerous inheritance. Frightened by all this, Katie urges Iris to leave the bar. But with nowhere else to go, Iris refuses. She sees Neil as a potential source of income. If they can grant him a final meeting with Sarah, they'll have enough money to change their lives. Reluctantly, Katie stays, despite her worries. The next morning, Iris heads down to the basement, declaring herself the new owner and writing "Do not cross" on the stairs as a warning, hoping to keep Baghead contained. She then leaves to find Neil and persuade him to return. Meanwhile, Katie tries to block the basement door with a wine barrel. As she prepares to leave, a picture frame suddenly falls. The photograph inside shows 2 men. The date on the back says 1972, and one is identified as Otto, the previous owner before Owen. The other man in the photo is the same lawyer who helped Iris sign the deed. Katie searches online and discovers that Otto died by suicide after a family crisis. She suddenly glimpses Otto in the house, but he vanishes as quickly as he appeared. At the same time, Neil confides in Iris, telling her about his wife Sarah, who died in a car crash. Devastated by her loss, Neil joined a grief support group, where he learned about Owen and his secret ability to communicate with the dead for a price. Later that night, Neil, Katie, and Iris all return to the basement for another attempt. Neil hands Baghead a cherished belonging of Sarah's, and Iris sets a timer for 2 minutes. Baghead quickly morphs into Sarah, her last memory being the moment before her fatal accident. But Neil has more on his mind than just a farewell. He interrogates Sarah, asking about her final days and who she might have loved besides him. Sarah denies any infidelity, but as the 2-minute mark passes, Baghead's influence grows, and she snaps that there was never another man. She simply couldn't bear life with Neil. The basement morphs around them, recreating the scene of Sarah's tragic accident. Iris spots Sarah weeping in the shadows, and wary but concerned, moves closer. Without warning, Sarah's appearance twists into a monstrous form. The creature overpowers Iris, pinning her down, hissing that Iris can never leave and is now bound to this cursed house. Baghead then slips away into the wall, vanishing as quickly as she appeared. Once calm returns, Neil insists he needs another session with Sarah, convinced he must move forward, and doubting the truth of her final words. But both Katie and Iris are exhausted and want him gone. They send Neil away, shutting the door on his demands. Later, Iris sits alone, nursing a drink, when she's confronted by a ghostly vision of her late father. She is pulled into a memory. Owen is shown pleading with Baghead to bring back his wife, desperate to apologize for 2 decades of absence and regret. Owen reveals he was trapped by the curse, unable to be with his family, and wherever he tried to see Iris, tragedy and illness would follow. As he attempts to end it all by setting fire to the bar, the 2-minute rule is broken. Baghead seizes control of his wife's spirit, turning on Owen and causing his death. Night falls, and strange noises pull Iris from her room. Not finding Katie in her bed, she traces the sounds to the basement. Instead of her friend, she encounters her father, who tries to lure her toward the gaping hole in the wall. But Iris refuses, realizing his face has become wild and twisted. Suddenly, Owen peels away his own skin, exposing himself as Baghead. The creature attacks, attempting to strangle Iris. She blacks out, waking in bed with a rope and key pressed tightly to her neck. Katie, hearing her cries, bursts in and manages to cut her free just in time. The next day, both women desperately try to reach the lawyer to remove Iris's name from the property, but he's nowhere to be found. On their way out, Katie becomes increasingly anxious for Iris's safety, urging her to leave immediately. But Iris refuses to abandon the bar, insisting she has nothing else in life, and accuses Katie of being jealous of her inheritance. Frustrated, Katie packs up and walks out, but despite their argument, she can't shake her concern for Iris. Katie's search leads her to Otto's deserted house, where she uncovers stacks of paperwork revealing Otto's desperate attempts to break the curse. Meanwhile, Iris, back at the bar, confronts Baghead in hopes of contacting her father again. Owen appears, confessing that he had hoped the building would burn, left no will, and wanted Iris nowhere near this place. Furious, Iris demands answers, but Owen can only beg her not to summon him again before fading away. Angry and hopeless, Iris heads upstairs, determined to destroy the deed. But no matter how many times she tries to burn the document, it won't burn. She realizes, irreversibly trapped by her choice. Time passes, and Katie returns to the bar, frantically calling for Iris, but gets no response because Iris, exhausted and defeated, lies unconscious inside. Assuming Iris is in the basement, Katie descends, only to come face to face with Baghead, who swallows documents that once belonged to Otto. This act causes Otto to materialize, alive once more. Katie, desperate for answers, questions Otto about Baghead's origins. He recounts a grim history. 4 centuries ago, a secretive group known as the Brotherhood discovered a woman capable of raising the dead. When she resisted their exploitation, they branded her a witch and burned her alive. Defying death, she returned for vengeance, killing many before being sealed away by the Brotherhood's dark magic. Over time, her power grew as descendants broke open her prison to use her abilities, always resulting in death for those who tried to control her. As Otto finishes the tale, the 2-minute mark is reached and Baghead overtakes his spirit. The door slams shut, trapping Katie inside. At dawn, Iris is roused by Katie's screams for help from the cellar. Terrified, she rushes downstairs, hearing her friend's pleas from deep within the wall. Disregarding Owen's old warning, Iris crawls into the gaping fissure in search of Katie. Inside, she navigates a twisting cavern, finally discovering Katie. But as they try to escape, Iris notices the real Katie's corpse. Horrified, she realizes the figure behind her is Baghead in disguise, ready to strike. Thinking quickly, Iris manages to dodge the attack, squeezing through the crack and back into the cellar. Just in time, Neil appears and pulls her away to safety. Once they make it upstairs, Neil hands Iris some medication, insisting it will help her calm down. She takes the pills, telling Neil that from now on, nobody will ever use Baghead again, making the entity powerless. Suddenly, Iris grows dizzy and starts to lose focus. Noticing this, Neil tells her to lie down and rest for a bit. Later, Iris wakes to find the room dark. Sensing something wrong, she quickly heads to the basement, where she hears Neil's voice echoing in the shadows. She discovers him deep in conversation with Baghead, bargaining to take on the role of her guardian in exchange for the chance to remain connected to his deceased wife forever. Neil writes his name on the deed, hoping to finalize the pact, but the signature vanishes, since Iris is still alive and remains the legal owner. Moments later, Baghead takes on Sarah's appearance and reveals to Neil a painful truth. She was pregnant at the time of her death, and his controlling nature drove her away. Sarah confesses she lived in fear and, after being drugged by Neil, fled in panic, resulting in her fatal crash. Overwhelmed by regret, Neil breaks down in tears. Sarah whispers that they can only be together if Iris is gone. Neil swears he isn't capable of murder, but Sarah insists that he destroyed both her and their unborn child. At that moment, Neil notices Iris listening from the shadows. He bolts after her as she flees to her room, desperately trying to call the police, only to find her phone dead. Panicking, she runs to the roof, but Neil corners her there. Iris pleads, trying to reason with him, reminding him that the woman in the basement is not truly Sarah, but Baghead manipulating him. Neil, blinded by grief, refuses to hear her out and attacks her violently. Iris manages to fight him off and tries to escape down the stairs, but Neil shoves her from the rooftop, resulting in her tragic death. In the aftermath, Neil carries Iris's body down to the basement. He offers his phone to Baghead, hoping she'll use it to resurrect Iris so her name can be placed on the deed. Baghead consumes the phone, and soon Iris's spirit appears. Neil, guilt-ridden, begs for forgiveness, explaining that he only wanted to be Baghead's guardian to reconnect with his wife. He asks her spirit to transfer the ownership to him. Instead, Iris, now speaking with a manic tone, thanks Neil for setting her free. She explains that since her soul is now part of Baghead and her name remains on the deed, she has become her own warden and is no longer trapped. Neil is confused, but suddenly Baghead violently turns on him, shifting forms, first to Neil's mother, breaking his hands,
Sweet boy!
then to Sarah, smashing his head into the ground, and finally to Iris herself, who delivers the fatal blow with a chair. The story closes with Baghead burning both the deed and the pub, finally walking out into the world. With no master or guardian left to confine her, she is at last free to roam wherever she wishes.